A mirror shatters at midnight, and a man lies dead. Welcome to Shadow Files. I am your host, Kale. I love seeing this community grow. Tell me where you're tuning in from today. Hearing from you makes this journey unforgettable. Let's begin. The Marchioness of Ravenscroft's ball was the kind of affair that set tongues wagging for weeks before it ever began. London society, still nursing its fading glamour after the war years, was hungry for a spectacle, and Lady Ravenscroft, with her flair for the dramatic, never disappointed. Her Mayfair townhouse glittered that evening, its chandeliers scattering light across silk gowns and polished boots. A string quartet played a gentle waltz. The air was heavy with perfume, champagne, and anticipation. The centerpiece of it all, spoken of as if it were the true guest of honor, was a Venetian mirror newly acquired at enormous expense. Tall, gilded, and dazzling, it dominated the grand hall, said to have belonged once to an Italian duchess whose fate was clouded in whispers of scandal. It was close to midnight when the music faltered. A shrill scream broke through the waltz, followed by the sound of shattering glass. Guests abandoned their champagne flutes and hurried to the hall where the great mirror now lay in jagged ruins. And sprawled amongst the shards, crimson seeping across ivory silk, was the body of Sir Reginald Ashcroft, a man whose reputation was as polished as his cufflinks, and whose secrets, it would soon be revealed, were as sharp as the glass that now surrounded him. The police were summoned, naturally. Statements were hurriedly collected. Rumors flitted from lip to lip like startled birds. Some swore they had seen Sir Reginald slip and fall. Others whispered of a quarrel earlier in the evening, voices raised, threats made. Lady Ravenscroft, pale but composed, insisted the tragedy was an accident. Yet one detail unsettled those with eyes keen enough to notice. The mirror had not merely fallen, it had been cut clean through at its fastening, and on Sir Reginald's hand, clenched even in death, lay a fragment of gold leaf, torn from the mirror's ornate frame. The guests waited uneasily, uncertain whether to mourn, to gossip, or to fear. But among them, one figure stood apart. Small, immaculate, moustache precise as a calligrapher's stroke. Hercule Poirot had not been invited to the ball, yet fate, it seemed, had a way of drawing him to scenes where order was shattered and truth lay hidden beneath broken surfaces. He bent over the fragments of glass, his eyes narrowing. "Mon Dieu," he murmured softly. A mirror, it reflects, but it also deceives. And this one, it tells a story most deadly. The murmur that follows a scream is unlike ordinary conversation. It flutters and scrapes like frightened wings. Poirot waited through it, unhurried, as if permitting the room to compose itself for his examination. The chandeliers threw a frigid, unwavering light upon the wreck of the mirror and the man who lay among its glittering ruin. A footman, white to the lips, had draped a damask cloth over Sir Reginald's chest, but the cloth made the blood more vivid where it seeped through. One of the ladies turned away with a strangled sound and was guided gently to a settee. Lady Ravenscroft, pale but erect, moved towards Poirot with that stubborn elegance of those trained never to show distress. "Monsieur Poirot, is it? I recognize you from the papers. I cannot think how— Well, it is lucky you are here." The last word faltered. "Please, do what you must." "I thank you, madame." His voice was low, almost kind. "It will be necessary, if you permit, to keep all your guests from departing until the police arrive." The explanations, they're always better when fresh. She nodded, swallowing. "Benton will see to it." She turned to the butler, a lean, grave man with hair brushed to a sheen. "Close the front doors and the terrace. Bring everyone into the music room. See that no one is distressed by the sight." Benton inclined his head and moved with professional quiet. Poirot bent nearer to the fallen frame. The gilded mirror had been tall. What remained was a heavy border of chased gold, its corners signed with rococo acanthus and the improbable peregrinations of cherubs. He noticed where the upper fastening had been cut, cleanly, with deliberation, not torn, not jarred loose. Cut. The shards lay in a wide fan, as though the glass had exploded outward, yet the heaviest splinters clustered oddly near the left. Poirot's eyes rested there, and for a moment the world reduced itself to angles and symmetry, to the romance of order newly violated. He straightened, dusting an invisible speck from his cuff. "There is always," he said to the room at large, "one small courtesy we may show to the dead. We may refuse to be clumsy in our thinking." His gaze travelled to the clenched hand visible beyond the cloth. The gold leaf between Sir Reginald's fingers had dulled to an old coin colour against the skin. Poirot did not touch it. He never competed with evidence. He merely looked until he was sure he would remember it later with absolute exactness. There was the heavy tread of authority in the corridor, and a moment later Chief Inspector Japp came in with 2 constables. He had the alert, rather pugnacious air of a small terrier who has scented a rat and is braced for sport. Upon seeing Poirot, his eyebrows rose in wry resignation. "Now then, if it isn't M. Poirot, you've chosen your evening well. Trust you to drop in where the glass is breaking." Poirot spread his hands. "I am like the pin, mon ami. I am drawn to the magnet of disorder." Japp's glance swept the room and settled on the body. The swift professional inventory crossed his face. "Right. Nobody in or out," he said to the constables. "We'll have statements, one by one. Lady Ravenscroft, thank you for your cooperation. I'll trouble you to gather your guests. Benton is doing so," she said. Her composure had a crack in it now. She gripped the back of a chair as if it were the only solid thing remaining. "Inspector, Sir Reginald. He was a friend. He has dined in this house 100 times. Japp's voice was not unkind. "I'm very sorry, my lady. But we'll need to know precisely what happened." What had happened began to take shape as people streamed into the music room. Those who a quarter of an hour earlier had been merely silhouettes in bright gowns and black coats. Now they were faces, each one with a story that he or she would be, in a very little time, eager to tell. Poirot stood near the mantel with an air of mild attention, but in truth he was pricking each face to the corkboard of his memory, pinning them with little labels: impatience, detachment, fear. First, a tall woman in jade silk, early 40s, with a mouth too sculpted to be trustworthy. Lydia Carstairs, a patroness of the opera, quick with a smile that never arrived quite in the eyes. She had been much in Sir Reginald's company of late. Gossip had done the rest, as gossip will when it is bored. Close behind her came a man with the red, polished look of a man accustomed to port and committee rooms, Simon Vale, Sir Reginald's partner in a shipping consortium. He had the shoulders of the prosperous and the eyes of the anxious. He glanced once at the spot where the mirror had stood and looked away, not because he was shocked, thought Poirot, but because he was calculating something he could not bear to postpone. A slender young man, almost beautiful, with a distracted air like a violin left near an open window, entered with exaggerated nonchalance. Viscount Julian Ravenscroft, Lady Ravenscroft's son. Money had made him languid. Debt had taught him a little quickness. Poirot's eye noted the faint smear of something dark at his shirt cuff, and filed the observation without comment. Next, a woman whose black dress was too severe for the ball yet too studied for mourning, Allegra Vesey, the Italian art dealer who had arranged the acquisition of the mirror. She carried a small reticule as if it were a reliquary, and her eyes were glossy, watchful. When she saw the broken gold, she made a small involuntary movement of the hand, quickly mastered. Authenticity, thought Poirot, is a word with uses many and varied. Behind her stood Major Lionel Burrows, retired, whose mustache bristled as if still on parade. He had the accoutrements of probity, a stiff back, a loud voice, a grievance lightly veiled as principle. He had played cards with Sir Reginald earlier, someone murmured. He claimed to have won. There was also a pale, precise young woman whom Poirot had noticed handing out programs for the dance sets. Miss Celia Ashcroft, Sir Reginald's niece and ward. She had eyes like a winter morning, clear and unyielding, and she held her hands clasped so hard that the knuckles whitened. Beside her hovered a gentleman whose occupation announced itself before introduction. Dr. Miles Fenbury, the family physician. He was medical in the way he stood, with a readiness that began at the eyes. And then the household. Benton, the butler, whose impassive face had the faintest smudge of fatigue at the corners. Mrs. Greeley, the housekeeper, round and red-eyed, repeatedly smoothing a napkin she had carried in some domestic reflex. And Fay Larkin, Lady Ravenscroft's maid, a girl with sharp elbows and the slow, careful gaze of the poor who have been told to behave amid silver. The orchestra players peered from the far end of the room, their instruments hushed in their cases, like birds with folded wings. Japp took the center of the rug and cleared his throat. Now, if you please, we'll begin with the general picture. He looked at Lady Ravenscroft. My lady? She told it simply, and the simplicity gave it force. The ball had prospered. The mirror, her triumph, had stood against the far wall of the hall, opposite the arch, leading to the winter garden. It had been meant to catch the candlelight at midnight, to spill it across the floor. Sir Reginald had excused himself from the card-room shortly before the hour, she said, to fetch a guest. Mr. Vale, perhaps. It is all blurred. And then a scream, and glass falling, and the dreadful sight. I saw... Her composure finally shifted, and then settled again, stubbornly. I saw no quarrel. Benton, did you? The butler's voice was flat and respectful. No, my lady. I was in the corridor between the dining room and the hall. I heard the crash and came at once. Where were the rest of you? Japp turned his head, making small notations on his pad. Lydia Carstairs, arms folded, said she had been in the winter garden, where the night air was cooler for dancing. There were others. We were discussing the placement of orchids with Lady Ravenscroft's gardener. I did not see Sir Reginald until after. She looked at her shoes. Mr. Vale interlaced thick fingers. In the card-room, with Major Burrows and Lord Julian. We were merely passing the time winning, Major Burrows observed. Slightly more than merely. Lord Julian flicked away a look at the Major as though he were a fly. It was a shilling game, he said. No one ruins a ball for a shilling. Sir Reginald, Japp persisted, was with you? For the first hands, Vale said. Then he left. To find me again, I thought. He spoke of some document. Oh, nothing of consequence, he added too quickly. Allegra Vesey contributed in her clear contralto that she had been attending the mirror earlier in the evening. Several guests had asked about its provenance. It was natural, she said delicately, to display it. But after 11 I went to the little boudoir. The air, it is very warm in England when people are many, is it not? I had brandy, with the Major. He is kind. She smiled, and the Major colored like a schoolboy. Miss Celia Ashcroft's voice was almost too calm. I was in the music room with Dr. Fenbury and Lady Ravenscroft, going over the list of patrons for the hospital fund. She did not look at her uncle's body. She looked at the wall above it with punishing steadiness. I did not see my uncle after 10. Moi, Poirot said gently, when Japp's pencil paused over him. I was in the corner near the orchestra. I had the honor to observe the dancing. Japp grunted. You always do, don't you? It began then, that delicate unpicking of hours into threads. The constables took notes. Benton brought coffee that nobody drank. The tale came out in repetitions and small contradictions. Someone had heard raised voices in the gallery about 11:45. 2 male voices, the housekeeper volunteered, frowning at the memory. But the acoustics mislead, sir. One thinks the sound is above and it is below. Did you recognize either voice? Japp asked. Mrs. Greeley pursed her lips. I did not like to say. But the deeper voice might have been Mr. Vale. The other, well, Lord Julian has a way of speaking like a person very bored, even when he is not. Lord Julian gave a charming smile that did not move his eyes at all. I'm often bored, Mrs. Greeley. The world does not sufficiently apply itself to entertaining me. Japp moved on, but Poirot's glance had sharpened. Boredom, he thought, is an underrated motive. It makes the cruel inventions. The orchestra master, summoned, recalled that Sir Reginald had crossed the hall alone 5 minutes before the crash, smoothing his hair in the mirror as he went. He seemed, if you'll pardon it, pleased with himself. And then the scream from a maid who had been returning a tray to the pantry. Fay, Lady Ravenscroft said, turning. You saw? Fay Larkin's hands clenched in her skirt. Only the moment, my lady. I heard a creak like a hinge, and then the glass came down in a sheet. Like Sir Reginald. He made a sort of, oh, sir, he looked so astonished. She put her fist to her mouth, as if the memory still made a sound. A hinge, Japp repeated. Interesting way to put it. Poirot's eyes had strayed to the skirting beneath the gap where the mirror had stood. There, faint and almost playful, was a pale crescent on the dark wood, where something had been removed recently, leaving the polish unworn. He saw, too, a fragment of frayed velvet cord caught at a gilt scroll of the frame. He did not touch it. He stored it with the angles and the fan of glass and the gold leaf in the dead man's hand. He could feel, through the disorder, the outline of a pattern. It would come, as such things always came, like a face in the mist when one ceased to stare too hard. Japp dismissed the bulk of the company for the moment, keeping a handful back. We'll need proper statements from each of you, he said. For now, remain on the premises. No telephoning unless to your own household. Constable will take the messages. He nodded to Poirot. Walk with me, will you? They went into the hall. 6 servants were quietly writing what could be righted. A screen had been placed to shield the worst from view. The air smelt of wax and a curious faint scent. Not perfume, not brandy. Poirot's nostrils flared, cataloguing. Something herbal. Bitter. He made no comment. Well, Japp said, you will permit me the very small observations? Poirot lifted a hand, twirled the tips of his moustache. The fastening cut, deliberate. The fall, controlled. And yet our victim has in his hand a piece of gold leaf, as though he grasped the frame while falling, or as though the frame had been thrust towards him, and he resisted. You think someone pushed the mirror at him? Japp's tone was skeptical. Seems a damned unwieldy weapon. Poirot's eyes were merry and remote. Mon ami, we English, he corrected himself with an exquisite shrug. We Belgians, we have a proverb. It is not the size of the stick, it is the hand that holds it. Consider also the insurance for such an object. Consider its provenance, which is to say, the truth and untruth that attend its history. Consider those who are relieved by Sir Reginald's death, and those who are inconvenienced. Japp snorted. Which counts everyone and no one. Vale's got money tied up with Ashcroft. The Major claims he took money off him. Lady Ravenscroft, pardon me, wouldn't thank us for a scandal. The Italian lady, what's her name, could have sold a dud. The boy owes somebody a packet, I'd bet my pension. And the niece, Celia, there's a face that's seen more than she'll say. Tiens, Poirot murmured. We are already almost of one mind. It is only necessary, you perceive, to find out which of them is the one who lies without talent. He turned back to the assembled, attentive now to small domestic music, the whisper of a maid dabbing at a spot, the soft thud of Benton setting down a tray, the faint rhythmic clink of a policeman's pencil against his buttons. In this orchestra, discord always revealed the murderer. Lady Ravenscroft approached again, her gloves, long, pearl white, held tightly in one hand. "Inspector, Monsieur Poirot, would you prefer the library for your interviews? It is quiet there. I have sent for more lamps. I cannot bear the dark." She glanced towards the screen. If you will allow me to arrange for Sir Reginald to be taken—" "No, of course. I understand. Only a short time, my lady," Japp said more gently than he usually managed. "We'll do what we can quickly." Poirot, looking at her gloves, smiled. "Those are very fine." "They were my late husband's taste," she said, unexpected sadness passing like a shadow. "He liked everything immaculate." "And yet," Poirot murmured, "men who like order so often leave their wives with the disorder of debts. Forgive a stranger the impertinence." There was the faintest pause. Lady Ravenscroft's chin lifted, almost imperceptibly. "Every household has its accounts, Monsieur Poirot." "Ah, but some must be balanced sooner than others." He let it pass like a leaf on water. "We will trouble you first, if we may, with only a few details." He stepped aside, allowing her to lead the way, and as he did so, he permitted himself one quick glance to the baseboard where the pale crescent had been. It pleased him, that small imperfection. It was like a whisper made visible. They went into the library, a long room lined with sober books, smelling of leather and patience. Lamps glowed in pools. Japp took a chair by the writing table, commanding as a magistrate. Poirot chose a smaller armchair quite near the fire, though no fire burned. He liked chairs that cradled rather than throned him. People spoke more truly when they felt themselves listened to instead of judged. Lady Ravenscroft sat opposite. Up close, the strain around her eyes was plain. She wore it as she wore her jewels. "Well, ask," she said. And the questions began, simple as pins. The mirror's purchase and arrival, who had handled it, the matter of its insurance, Sir Reginald's recent dealings, his temper, his friends. She answered with an economy that would have done credit to a lawyer. Yes, the mirror had been acquired through Madame Vesey. Yes, an expert had certified it. Yes, it was insured. Her lips tightened at that. Yes, Sir Reginald had hinted at a generous donation to the hospital fund. No, she had heard no quarrel. When asked softly whether Sir Reginald had ever exerted influence over her son, she paused and then said calmly that Sir Reginald had been, fond of Julian, and that fondness sometimes imagines it has rights. Poirot made a small sound, almost of sympathy. He tucked away her phrasing. Fondness sometimes imagines it has rights. It would be useful to remember who felt entitled tonight. When she had finished, she rose, steadied herself with the tips of her fingers upon the chair, and said, "If you have done with me, Inspector, there is a little thing I must see to." "The orchids." "The orchids will wait," Japp said. "But yes, for the moment, thank you." She went, and in the doorway she hesitated, looking back at the two men, a brief, undecipherable look, and was gone. "Orchids," Japp muttered. "That's a lady for you." "Perhaps," said Poirot. "Or perhaps she remembers a detail quite suddenly and must see if it is true before it fades. Let us have the young Viscount next. I have a curiosity about his cuffs." Japp lifted an eyebrow. "What about his cuffs?" Poirot smiled. "Ah, my friend. That is the little order in me. It insists upon being satisfied. We will ask him, and if he is innocent, the answer will be nothing at all. But if he is guilty, he will answer with too much." He folded his hands neatly. "The truth, you observe, is modest. It does not need to preen." Outside, somewhere in the great house, a clock began to strike midnight very late, as though even time had hesitated at the fall of the mirror. The Viscount entered the library with the careless grace of a man who has learned that the world will always make space for him. His blonde hair was rumpled in the exact measure that suggested style rather than neglect, and his dark eyes were bright with a light that hovered uneasily between arrogance and fatigue. He had in his right hand a cigarette in a long ivory holder. When Japp motioned that smoking would not be permitted, he smiled faintly and let it dangle, unlit between his fingers, as though the gesture itself were sufficient rebellion. "Lord Julian Ravenscroft," Japp began, consulting his notebook. "You were with Mr. Vale and Major Burroughs in the card-room until shortly before the accident." Julian gave a slight bow, his lips curved in amusement. "Indeed. A few hands of bridge. No more. The Major played as though he were storming the Somme, and Vale, well, Vale's always had the poker face of a bishop. Reginald grew bored, I suppose, and left us. He was a restless man." Japp's eyes narrowed. "Restless, maybe. Dead now, certainly." "Did he say why he was leaving?" Julian shrugged, letting the silk of his jacket slip an inch from one shoulder. He muttered something about business. He was always muttering about business. One cannot expect a man who made his fortune in coal to understand that not every occasion is an occasion for coal. Japp scowled at the flippancy. Poirot, however, leaned forward. "Permit me, Lord Julian. It is curious to me that you should speak so of Sir Reginald, when I observed earlier a certain familiarity, an intimacy, even, between you." The young man laughed softly, though a faint colour crept into his cheek. "Intimacy, Monsieur Poirot? You make it sound indecent." Sir Reginald was a family friend. He had known my father, may he rest in peace. He took an interest in my affairs. Too much of an interest, perhaps. Too much. Poirot's moustaches quivered with polite curiosity. "And what affairs were these?" "Cards, women, debts," Julian said indifferently. "The usual amusements of a man of my age." Sir Reginald believed he had the right to guide me. He was mistaken. "Yet you tolerated it?" "Because he held the purse strings at times, and because my mother trusted him." His tone hardened slightly, and for a moment the mask of indolence slipped. "But I am not a schoolboy. I do not need a guardian." Poirot allowed silence to linger. He studied the cuff of Julian's shirt, the faint, dark smear he had seen earlier. Now, in the lamplight of the library, it resolved itself into something more definite. A stain, faint, reddish-brown, hardly visible. He filed the observation without comment. To draw attention to it would be to alert the Viscount. Better to let it rest until the moment was ripe. Japp resumed. "Where were you at the time of the crash?" "In the card-room still." The Major had left for brandy. Vale was attempting to explain shipping stocks to me, which is the dullest conversation ever invented. Then the crash, the scream, chaos. We ran out. "That is all. You didn't hear voices raised earlier in the gallery?" Julian smiled again, but the smile was brittle. "Raised voices are common at these affairs, Inspector. Husbands, wives, creditors. If one took them all seriously, one would never dance." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet, you yourself are said to have raised your voice." "Am I?" Julian's eyes narrowed a fraction. "Then I have been slandered. I do not raise my voice. I find it vulgar. The interrogation proceeded, but yielded little more." Julian left the room with the same languid elegance, though Poirot noted that his hand tightened fractionally on the ivory holder as he passed through the door. A small sign of strain, as telling as a crack in porcelain. Next came Simon Vale. The businessman was a man of bulk and weight, both physical and financial. He sat heavily, as though chairs existed to bear him rather than to comfort him, and wiped his forehead with a handkerchief already damp. His watch chain gleamed across his waistcoat like a badge of office. "Mr. Vale," Japp said, "you and Sir Reginald were partners." "Indeed. Ashcroft and Vale, shipping and coal. Profitable enough, though not without difficulties. You understand the climate, Inspector. Labor unrest, strikes, tariffs. Sir Reginald had ideas, not all of them sound. He was ambitious. Too ambitious, Poirot interjected softly. Ambition, monsieur, is not a crime. No, but recklessness is close. He wanted to expand into Mediterranean trade, put money into Italian ventures. Risky business. I opposed it. He was angry with me. Angry enough to quarrel? Vale dabbed at his face. Yes, we quarreled. Only a week ago, in fact. But tonight was to be reconciliation. He spoke of some document. I expected he would bring it to me. Instead, this Jap eyed him shrewdly. And the document? Vale spread his hands. I do not know. He kept his papers close. He trusted no one. Perhaps it is still in his pocket, Poirot murmured. Perhaps it is in another pocket altogether. He let the words fall like a feather, and Jap gave him a look of impatience. Poirot smiled serenely. The questioning continued. Vale insisted he had been in the card room, corroborated by Burroughs. He denied being in the gallery, though Mrs. Greeley's testimony suggested otherwise. His voice grew defensive, his hands restless. Poirot watched him carefully, noting the tremor that came when he spoke of money. Men could hide many things, lust, resentment, vanity, but money always betrayed them. When Vale was dismissed, Major Burroughs entered. He was bristling with indignation, as if the very fact of being questioned were an affront to his service record. He declared at once that he had been in the card room, had won fairly at cards, had left only briefly for brandy. He insisted he had heard nothing, seen nothing, suspected nothing. Damn shame, Ashcroft's End, of course, but the fellow was reckless. Reckless with money, reckless with company. If you ask me, it was an accident, plain and simple. Mirrors fall. Men stumble. That's all Poirot regarded him with mild eyes. You do not believe in murder, Major. I believe in facts. And the fact is, glass cuts. No need for foreigners' puzzles about motives in psychology. Poirot inclined his head, the faintest smile touching his lips. Yet, Major, it was not the glass that cut the fastening of the mirror. Burroughs flushed. Well, I'm no expert in carpentry. Perhaps it was faulty. That's all I'll say. When the Major left, stamping slightly, Poirot allowed himself a small sigh. Voilà, mon ami, he said to Jap. Already the masks, they begin to slip. The Viscount he resents, the businessman he trembles, the Major he protests too much. It is like the theatre, is it not? Everyone plays a part. Allegra Vesey was next. She entered with smooth composure, her dark eyes luminous in the lamplight. She sat delicately, as though her every movement were a performance. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and musical. The mirror, it was my triumph, she said. I brought it from Venice, arranged its transport, oversaw its installation. It was a masterpiece, a treasure. And now, destroyed. Jap grunted. You're certain it was genuine? Her smile was faintly ironic. Inspector, I'm certain of what I sell. Others may doubt, but I know. Sir Reginald did not doubt. He paid me handsomely. He wished to impress, to dazzle. That is what such men always wish. Poirot leaned forward. And you, madame? What did you wish? Her eyes flickered, just for a moment. Respect. Success. Is it wrong for a woman to wish to be acknowledged in her profession? But perhaps you suggest that I profited twice. Once by selling, again by insuring. No, Monsieur Poirot. I do not stoop to fraud. Yet you were in the boudoir with Major Burroughs when the crash came? She inclined her head. Yes, he is amusing, and I was weary. That is all, perhaps, Poirot murmured. But fatigue. It does not explain the little fragment of velvet cord caught upon the frame. That is curious, is it not? She looked at him sharply. Velvet cord? I know nothing of such a thing. Of course, Poirot said gently. "It is perhaps nothing. Yet it is curious, all the same." She left soon after, her composure intact, but her eyes darker than before. At last came Celia Ashcroft. She was pale, but her eyes steady. She answered questions with clarity, her voice cool. She admitted her uncle's severity, his control of her fortune, his insistence that she marry well. She denied quarrelling with him. She spoke of her devotion to Lady Ravenscroft, of her gratitude for shelter. Yet Poirot saw, in the set of her mouth, a suppressed fury. He filed it away. Suppressed fury is a dangerous thing. By the time the interviews concluded, it was near 2:00. The house was quiet, save for the murmurs of servants and the tread of constables. Japp stretched, weary. "A nest of motives," he said. "Money, resentment, pride. Any of them could have done it. But only one did," Poirot replied softly. He looked at the fragments of glass still scattered in the hall, at the pale crescent mark upon the floor, at the clenched hand of the dead man. "And already, mon ami, the truth begins to whisper. It is faint, like a tune heard through a wall, but it is there." Japp groaned. "You'll have me chasing phantoms again?" Poirot smiled. "No, mon ami. Not phantoms. Psychology. The little contradictions. A stain upon a cuff, a phrase too carefully chosen, a silence where there should be a protest. These are the things that reveal the soul." Outside, the clock struck again, its echo rolling through the silent house. Poirot turned his head slightly, listening as though to a signal only he could understand. "The mirror has shattered," he murmured. "But the reflection, it remains. And in it, we shall see the truth." The library had grown hushed in the small hours, the air heavy with lamplight and fatigue. Poirot sat motionless, his hands steepled, while Japp shuffled through his notes. The inspector's manner had changed. He had the satisfaction of a man whose net seemed to be drawing tight. "It adds up, Poirot," Japp said at last, with the air of one concluding a sermon. "Vale, Simon Vale. He had the motive, the quarrel, the opportunity. The butler places him near the corridor. The housekeeper hears his voice raised, and he admits himself that Ashcroft was bringing him some document. If that document was dangerous to him, well, there you are. He cuts the fastening, lures Ashcroft toward the mirror, and down it comes. Simple as a brick, Poirot's eyes glimmered. Simple as a brick indeed, mon ami. But bricks rarely concern themselves with mirrors. Japp's jaw tightened. Don't start with your metaphors. I've men who'll swear they heard Vale's voice, and he's sweating like a sinner at confession. You saw him, certainly, Poirot replied. But a man may sweat from guilt or from fear of suspicion. There is a difference. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intent. Consider, Japp. If one wishes to dispose of an enemy, does one choose a method so elaborate, so flamboyant, so certain to attract attention? To cut the fastening of a mirror, to wait until the hall is crowded, to hope that the right man should stand in precisely the right place? None. It is too extravagant. It is theatre, and Simon Vale, he is no actor, he is a businessman. He does not gamble on chance. He invests. Japp scowled, though his pen continued to scratch across the page. Still, he's the best lead we've got. I'll have him kept under guard until morning. Poirot said nothing, merely tapped his fingers together, as though keeping time to an inaudible waltz. The interrogation of Vale resumed in the early dawn. He returned to the library looking greyer than before, his waistcoat rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. He lowered himself into the chair with the air of a man who had aged years in a night. "Mr. Vale," Japp began briskly, "we've reason to believe you were in the gallery at the time of Sir Reginald's death. Mrs. Greeley places your voice there. Can you deny it?" Vale rubbed his forehead. "I can only tell you the truth." I was not in the gallery. I was in the card room. Burrows saw me. Lord Julian saw me. Burrows admits you left briefly, Japp pressed. To fetch brandy, perhaps? A convenient alibi, Vale's voice rose. Yes, I left. For a minute only. I went toward the dining room, but I never reached the gallery. If Mrs. Greeley thought she heard me there, she was mistaken. Poirot's voice cut gently through the air. Monsieur Vale, perhaps you will indulge me with a small question. This document of which Sir Reginald spoke, what did you suppose it to be? Vale's hands trembled as he twisted the handkerchief in his fingers. I thought, a contract, perhaps. He had threatened to alter terms of our partnership. Or it might have been a letter, I do not know, but he meant to use it against me. That is certain. And yet, Poirot murmured, he died before it was shown to you. Curious, is it not? As though death had silenced him at the very moment he might have ruined you. A convenient accident. For you, Vale's face sagged. You think I planned this? Cut down a mirror in a crowded hall, it's madness. If I wanted him gone, there were simpler ways. I am not a fool. Japp slammed his notebook shut. We'll see what the coroner says. Until then, you stay put. By midday, suspicion had hardened like plaster. The guests, confined still within the house, whispered in corners. The servants moved with strained silence. Lady Ravenscroft kept her composure, though her eyes lingered too long on her son. Celia Ashcroft sat pale and straight-backed in the drawing-room, refusing all offers of tea. Allegra Vesey wrote letters in a fine Italian hand, glancing up now and then at the shattered remains of her mirror. To the household, Vale was the villain. He had quarrelled openly with Sir Reginald. He had something to lose. He had the aspect of a guilty man. Even Major Burrows, who professed to despise speculation, muttered that Vale had the look of a man cornered. It was almost a relief to them, this focusing of suspicion. In chaos, the mind seeks an anchor, and Vale had become theirs. But Poirot was not satisfied. That evening, Poirot walked alone through the hall, now dimly lit by a single lamp. The fragments of glass had been cleared, but the pale outline where the mirror had stood remained. He knelt, studied the mark again, traced it lightly with his gloved finger. He noted the faint indentation of the carpet where the mirror's base had pressed for weeks, and he noticed, too, the faintest scrape on the wooden floorboards beneath. Fresh, sharp, not dulled by polish. He whispered softly, "It was moved." Ah, mais oui, it was moved before it fell. He rose, brushing the dust delicately from his trousers, and looked about the silent hall. His eyes rested on the corridor leading to the boudoir, then upon the stairs to the gallery. His lips curved in satisfaction. "Mon cher Vale," he murmured, "you may be many things, but you are not the man who drags mirrors about in the night." The following morning, Japp announced his intention to arrest Vale formally. Poirot, ever polite, did not object, yet his silence was of the kind that provokes more than speech. He followed Japp into the study, where Vale sat between two constables, his face ashen. "Simon Vale," Japp began, "I must inform you." "Un moment, mon ami." Poirot raised a hand, as delicate as though conducting an orchestra. "Before you proceed, allow me one question. Mr. Vale, do you wear gloves often?" Vale blinked. "Gloves? Number. Why should I?" Poirot turned to Japp. "And when the fastening of the mirror was cut, mon ami, was there found upon the shards any fragment of cloth, any trace of leather?" Japp frowned. "We haven't checked." "Then check. You will find nothing, because the fastening was not cut with a tool of business, nor by a man of Vale's habit. Non. It was cut with a hand both clever and careless, ungloved, leaving behind a trace, a smear upon the gilding, a mark upon a cuff. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Not the cuff of Mr. Vale, who trembles at dust, but of one whose elegance is careless, whose debts are many, whose resentment burns hot. Japp stared. "You mean—" Poirot smiled. "I mean only, mon ami, that the false lead. It is too obvious. Vale, he is made to look guilty, mais naturellement. But truth, it hides in the shadows. We must look elsewhere." He tapped his temple. "Use the little grey cells." "Always, always," Vale sagged with relief, though confusion mingled with it. Japp muttered an oath, shut his notebook, and snapped for the constables to wait outside. He glared at Poirot. If not Vale, then who? Poirot merely twirled his moustache. "Patience, mon ami. A puzzle is solved not by hammering the pieces, but by letting them fall into their places. For now, keep your Vale safe. If he is innocent, then his danger is still very real." That night, Poirot walked once more through the house, pausing at doorways, listening to the hush. He paused at Lady Ravenscroft's door, where low voices murmured, hers and Julian's. He lingered near Celia's chamber, where the girl wept quietly into her pillow. He paused by Allegra Vezi's boudoir, where the faint scent of bitter herbs drifted still. He stored it all away. When he returned to the library, he found Japp waiting, gruff and restless. "Well?" Poirot sat down, arranged his cuffs, and spoke softly. "The first false lead, mon ami, is always the loudest. Tonight everyone believes Simon Vale is guilty. That is why he cannot be. The truth is subtle. It glitters in the glass, but one must look at the reflection, not the shards. Soon it will reveal itself." He leaned back, his eyes half closed, as though listening to some inner melody. Japp shook his head, muttering, but Poirot only smiled. "Tomorrow, Inspector. Tomorrow the game begins in earnest." The morning broke pale and uncertain, as though London itself shared the unease of the Ravenscroft household. The great townhouse was subdued, servants moved about with downcast eyes. Guests spoke in whispers, and Lady Ravenscroft presided over the breakfast table with the strained elegance of a hostess who refuses to admit that her party has ended in blood. Hercule Poirot sat at the table, immaculate as ever, his napkin folded with geometric precision. He partook of toast and coffee as though nothing were amiss, yet every so often his dark eyes flicked to one guest or another. He watched. He listened, and he noted the subtle tremors beneath the polished surface of manners. Simon Vale hunched over his plate, appetite vanished, eyes darting nervously. Allegra Vezi buttered her croissant with careful artistry, though her lips were tight. Major Burroughs devoured eggs noisily, as if proving his indifference by force. Celia Ashcroft barely touched her food, her hand clenched on her teacup so tightly that Poirot expected porcelain to crack. And Lord Julian Ravenscroft, pale but defiant, sipped his coffee with studied languor, as though daring the room to accuse him. Poirot dabbed his lips delicately. "Mes amis," he said lightly, "I fear our host of last evening, Sir Reginald, casts a long shadow still. But perhaps a little conversation may disperse it, eh? Tell me, do you not find mirrors fascinating? They reflect, yet they may deceive. One sees oneself, but not as others see. An interesting paradox, n'est-ce pas?" There was a ripple across the table. Allegra Vezi gave a small smile. "In Venice, we say that a mirror may show not only the face, but the soul. But it can also trap a soul if it is cursed." "Superstition," grunted Burroughs, spearing a sausage. "Nothing more." Julian's voice, smooth and mocking, drifted across. "How dull, Major, to dismiss all poetry. Perhaps the mirror chose its victim. Perhaps poor Reginald gazed into it and saw, too, much of himself." A faint clink betrayed Celia's trembling hand against her cup. Vale gave a nervous laugh. Lady Ravenscroft's eyes, cool and commanding, silenced the exchange. But Poirot had observed it all, the flicker of unease, the nerves struck by his deliberate mention of mirrors. After breakfast, Poirot proposed a curious diversion. Since we are all detained here by the necessities of the investigation, perhaps we shall pass the time profitably. Each of us will recall where precisely we stood at the moment before the tragedy. We shall reenact the positions. Voila, it will amuse, it will clarify Jap. Grumbling permitted it. And so, under Poirot's direction, the hall was once again peopled. The guests stood where they claimed to have been, Vale in the card-room doorway, Burroughs near the dining room, Julian by the gallery stairs, Allegra in the corridor leading to the boudoir, Celia and Lady Ravenscroft at the threshold of the music room. Servants hovered at the edges, uneasy. Poirot moved among them like a conductor arranging an orchestra. He adjusted Vale's stance by a step, directed Julian to lean against the banister as he had done, positioned Allegra with her reticule clutched just so. Then he stepped back, eyes half closed, and murmured, "Ah, comme c'est intéressant. One sees how the angles change. One sees who might observe, who might not. One sees also who lies." Julian gave a short laugh. "Really, Poirot, this is theatre." "Mais oui, my lord, but in theatre, the truth reveals itself." You will see Poirot's eyes fixed suddenly on Julian's cuff. "Ah, mon cher, forgive me, but that stain, it persists, does it not?" Julian's face tightened. He looked down, then gave a careless shrug. "Wine." From supper, Poirot smiled gently. "Perhaps. Yet it is curious. Wine stains purple. This is brown." For an instant, silence froze the air. Then Julian tossed back his head. "You are ridiculous, Poirot. I shall not play along with your parlor tricks." He stalked away a pace, but not before Poirot caught the flicker of Lady Ravenscroft's eyes, sharp and warning, darted toward her son. It was the glance of a mother who fears for her child, and fears still more for what might be revealed. Later, Poirot took Celia Ashcroft aside. The girl's face was pale, her lips pressed bloodless. He spoke to her softly, as though to a nervous bird. "Mademoiselle, you are troubled. Your uncle, he was perhaps not kind." Her voice was low and strained. "He controlled everything. My fortune, my prospects. He said he would decide whom I should marry. He said I owed him obedience." "And you resented it?" She lifted her chin, defiance flickering through her grief. "Would you not?" "I'm not a child. I'm 22. I wanted freedom." Poirot inclined his head. "Freedom, yes. But freedom is not bought with murder." Her eyes flashed. "I did not kill him." She turned abruptly, tears spilling, and hurried away. Poirot remained still, thoughtful. "She is innocent, perhaps," he murmured. "But innocence can be dangerous when mixed with desperation. We shall see." By afternoon, Poirot arranged another little scene. He gathered the principal guests in the drawing-room and, with a smile, produced a small folded paper. "Behold," he announced, "a letter discovered this morning in the hall. It is unsigned, yet it contains words most curious. It says, 'The mirror will fall, and with it the truth.' Now I ask you, who wrote this?" There was a collective start. Vale went white. Burroughs barked a protest. Allegra's lips parted in astonishment. Celia gasped softly. Julian gave a mocking laugh. "Surely, Poirot, you don't expect us to believe such melodrama." "You've planted this to amuse yourself." Poirot only smiled. "Ah, but it is not a trick, mon cher. It is genuine, and the guilty one will betray themselves, not by words, but by silence." He let the silence stretch, heavy and oppressive. His gaze drifted from face to face. He noted Allegra's steady composure, Burroughs's bluster, Vale's trembling, Celia's confusion, and then Julian's eyes, too bright, his smile too forced. Lady Ravenscroft's hand tightened upon his arm, restraining him. "Ah," murmured Poirot. "How fascinating." Japp leaned toward him. "What was that letter, Poirot?" "Where did you find it?" Poirot's moustaches twitched. "In truth, mon ami, it exists only in my pocketbook. Blank, without a word. But the reactions, they are worth more than words. One sees who fears discovery. One sees who plays the part too well." Japp swore softly. "You and your games." Poirot spread his hands. "The psychology, mon ami. It is the only path to truth." That evening, Poirot took another step in his silent game. He contrived to place Allegra Vezi, Vale, and Burroughs together in conversation, then excused himself, slipping behind a screen where he could observe unseen. He watched how Allegra's eyes slid toward Vale with contempt, how Vale avoided her gaze, how Burroughs puffed out his chest as though to shield himself from unseen accusation. He noted, too, the moment when Lady Ravenscroft entered, and all conversation ceased abruptly. Fear, Poirot thought. Always it comes back to fear. Fear of scandal, fear of loss, fear of truth. When night descended, Poirot summoned Japp once more to the library. The inspector was weary, his patience frayed. "Well, you've toyed with them all day. What have you got?" Poirot leaned forward, his eyes glittering. "I have seen the psychology at work. Vale sweats with guilt, but guilt of business, not of murder. Allegra hides secrets, but secrets of commerce, not of blood. Celia trembles with resentment, but she is too young, too fragile. Burroughs blusters, but bluster is the refuge of the innocent. And Julian, Julian. He mocks, he sneers, he shrugs, but beneath the fear, the cuff stained, the hand restless, and the mother who warns him with her eyes." Japp frowned. "You think Julian did it?" Poirot shook his head slowly. "I think, mon ami, that he is close to it. Very close. Perhaps he acted. Perhaps he knows who did. But there is a bond of silence. Between mother and son, perhaps. That silence, it speaks louder than words." He rose, smoothing his moustache with precision. "Tomorrow there will be another move in the game. The guilty one will act again. They must. For truth, it presses upon them as the glass pressed upon Sir Reginald. And when they act, we shall be ready." The night that followed was thick with unease, as though the house itself were holding its breath. The lamps in the corridors burned lower. Shadows stretched longer across the carpets, and the Ravenscroft household lay beneath a tension that no amount of polite conversation or brandied courage could dispel. Poirot, who had retired early to his chamber, did not in fact sleep. He sat in an armchair near the fire, eyes half closed, listening. He had the air of a man at rest, but his ears were keen for the slightest stir, the creak of a stair, the hush of footsteps in corridors where none ought to tread. For he had declared to Japp that the guilty party must act again, and Poirot trusted his own prediction as one trusts the sun to rise. It came just after 2:00, the faintest echo of movement, a door opening with exquisite caution, the whisper of silk against the wood-panelled passage. Poirot rose silently, his shoes in hand, and stepped into the corridor. His senses sharpened at once. Somewhere ahead, down toward the boudoir, a flicker of light wavered. He moved quietly, pausing at the turn of the staircase. The faint light glowed beneath the boudoir door. Poirot waited, patient as a cat. A rustle, a soft clink, the unmistakable sound of a drawer being opened. Then a muffled gasp. Poirot advanced, turning the handle softly and pushing the door open. The boudoir was dim, lit only by a single candle stub. At the escritoire knelt Celia Ashcroft, her pale face illuminated in the wavering light. Papers lay scattered before her, her hands trembling as she rifled through them. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said quietly. She whirled, her eyes wide with terror. The candle guttered, casting grotesque shadows. "Monsieur Poirot, But her words were swallowed by a scream. From the corridor came a heavy crash, followed by the unmistakable sound of shattering glass. Poirot darted forward, swept the candle from danger of toppling, and guided Celia upright. "Stay here," he ordered firmly, then strode to the hall. There, chaos reigned again. A second mirror, smaller, oval, and set above a console, lay smashed upon the floor, and beneath it, sprawled grotesquely, was Major Burroughs. His mustache was matted with blood, his limbs splayed at unnatural angles. A broken shard jutted cruelly from his throat. Guests and servants came running, cries echoing through the house. Lady Ravenscroft appeared in a silk robe, her face drained of colour. Lord Julian followed, his expression a mask of shock tinged with something Poirot could not miss. Fear. Allegra Vesey, hastily dressed, clutched her reticule as though it were armour. Vale stumbled from his room, hair disordered, eyes wild. Japp, half-dressed and already irritable, pushed through the crowd with his constables. Good God! Another one? His eyes fell on the crumpled form of Burroughs. Well, there's no accident about this. No one dies like that twice in the same house. Poirot bent over the body. His eyes were calm, his hands steady. It is murder again, mon ami. Or rather, it is silencing. He pointed delicately to the wound. Observe. The shard is placed as if guided, not as if fallen by chance, and yet the mirror, like the first, was tampered with. This time, cut cords again, deliberate. The Major, he was meant to be the victim. Lady Ravenscroft gave a shudder. Major Burroughs. But why him? Poirot's gaze swept the assembled faces. Because he knew something. He was not clever, perhaps, but he was observant. He spoke too freely yesterday of winnings, of quarrels. Perhaps he saw what he should not. And so, the hand of the murderer struck again. Japp barked orders. Constables herded the household back to the drawing-room. Poirot lingered by the broken mirror, his eyes drawn to a faint smear upon the console. Not blood, but something dark, resinous, faintly aromatic. He touched it lightly with a gloved fingertip, sniffed and murmured, "Ah, the bitter herbs again." He rose and returned to the drawing-room, where the company sat in uneasy silence. The atmosphere was different now, tighter, darker. One death might be explained away as accident. 2 shattered mirrors and 2 corpses turned accident into certainty. Fear hung in the air like smoke. Poirot stood before them, his small figure radiating quiet command. My friends, the tragedy has deepened. Major Burroughs is dead. This is no longer the question of an unfortunate mishap. It is murder, twice over, and the murderer is among us still. There was a collective intake of breath. Vale muttered a prayer. Allegra clutched her reticule tighter. Celia trembled openly. Julian lit a cigarette with hands that shook despite his efforts at nonchalance. Lady Ravenscroft sat rigid, her eyes like chips of glass. Poirot allowed the silence to stretch, pressing down upon them. Then he spoke softly. You will forgive me if I am abrupt. But I must warn you, the murderer is desperate. Desperation makes for rash deeds. No one must wander alone tonight. No one must seek to leave. Inspector Japp and his men will see to it. Japp grunted agreement, though his face betrayed unease. We'll double the guard. And I'll have this place searched from cellar to roof. Poirot inclined his head. Bon. Meanwhile, there are matters we must consider. He let his gaze rest on each face in turn. Twice, mirrors have been the instruments of death. Twice, we have the symbolism of reflection. Ask yourselves, why the mirrors? Why not the knife, the rope, the pistol? Because the murderer, he is theatrical. He wishes not only to kill, but to make a statement. A mirror is chosen for a reason. Celia gave a small sob. It is like a curse. Non, mademoiselle. Not a curse. A mind. A clever, cruel mind. Later, in the quiet of the library, Japp paced while Poirot sat, serene as ever. Well, Japp muttered, we can't hang this one on Vale. He was in his room with a constable outside when Burroughs was killed. Unless he's a magician, he's clear. Poirot nodded. So, the false lead crumbles. We look elsewhere. Vale was the decoy, the puppet meant to draw our eyes. The true culprit strikes again. More boldly, Japp threw up his hands. Then who? The boy? Julian? Poirot's mustaches twitched. Julian is careless, foolish, vain. He stains his cuff and lies poorly. But is he a murderer? Perhaps not. Or perhaps he knows who is. He grew grave. But consider, mon ami, the scent. Twice now I've smelt it. Faint, bitter, medicinal. It clings in the boudoir. It lingers on the console. Someone used a substance not common, not accidental. Someone who deals with herbs, tinctures, restoratives. The doctor, Japp muttered. Fenbury. Ah, Poirot said softly. Perhaps, or perhaps another who borrowed such knowledge. But it is a clue, mon ami, and I do not overlook clues. That night the house slept uneasily. Celia wept in her chamber. Vale tossed on his bed. Allegra wrote furiously in her diary. Julian prowled the corridor like a caged animal. Lady Ravenscroft alone remained composed, moving through the rooms with quiet authority, whispering to servants, ensuring order was maintained. Poirot, awake still, reflected on what he had seen. 2 mirrors shattered, 2 men dead, a web of motives stretching through the house like cracks in glass. He saw in his mind the clenched hand of Reginald Ashcroft, the fragment of gold leaf, the pale crescent mark on the floor where the mirror had been moved, the velvet cord caught on the frame, the bitter herbs staining the console. Each detail was a piece of the puzzle, and already the outline of truth was forming. The murderer, he murmured, is clever. But cleverness leaves traces, and he placed a hand upon his temple. I see the pattern. He rose, adjusted his cuffs, and looked out the window at the pale gleam of dawn. Tomorrow, I think, the net shall begin to close. The sun rose pale and reluctant over Mayfair, casting the Ravenscroft townhouse in a washed-out light that made it appear less a home than a mausoleum. The servants moved about, quietly, their footsteps muffled as though to speak above a whisper might summon some new calamity. 2 deaths within as many nights had left the household shrouded in dread. Poirot emerged from his chamber, immaculate as ever. His grey suit was pressed to perfection, his moustache waxed to a faultless curve, his shoes gleaming like obsidian. He looked, as always, untouched by circumstance, yet his eyes were sharp, alert, fixed upon details invisible to others. He had not slept, but he did not need to. His little grey cells had been working, arranging and rearranging the fragments of evidence into a pattern. And this morning, he was very near to hearing the music of that pattern clearly. Inspector Japp, by contrast, looked worn and haggard. He met Poirot at the bottom of the stairs, rubbing his temples. I've wired the yard. We'll have more men here by afternoon. But between you and me, Poirot, I don't like it. It's too cursed neat. Mirrors and more mirrors. Burroughs gone in the same fashion as Ashcroft. What do you make of it? Poirot spread his hands. It is neat, yes, but too neat, mon ami. The murderer thinks in symbols. It is not only death that he arranges. It is a drama. A mirror it reflects, but also it hides. Do you not see? Each crime is not simply an act of killing, it is a message. Japp growled. What kind of message? That, said Poirot softly, is what we shall soon discover. The first order of the morning was to examine Major Burroughs's body with greater care. Japp permitted Poirot a close look before it was taken away. Poirot bent delicately, his gaze lingering on the shard of glass lodged in the Major's throat. He noted the angle, the depth, the peculiar neatness of the wound. Not chance, he murmured. Precision. He reached for his magnifying glass, examined the shard's edge. There, faintly visible, was a smudge, a smear of something dark, resinous, sticky. He sniffed, his nose wrinkling delicately. Ah, the bitter herbs again. Valerian, wormwood, something of that family. An unusual perfume for a murder. Japp leaned over his shoulder. So what does it mean? Someone doused the mirror with the stuff? Poirot shook his head. No. This is not scent to please the nose. It is medicine, or perhaps poison. And whoever handled this shard, whoever placed it with such care, had the trace upon their hands. He straightened, his eyes gleaming. Voila, the murderer reveals themselves, though they do not know it. The day's interviews began anew. The household gathered in the library, though they came reluctantly, with the air of condemned souls summoned before judgment. Poirot took his place by the fire, Japp at the desk with his notebook. Mes amis, Poirot began, yesterday we had suspicion. Today we have certainty. Sir Reginald Ashcroft and Major Burroughs were murdered. Both deaths by mirrors, both deliberate. The hand that struck once has struck again. But already the threads of truth show themselves. He turned first to Simon Vale. Monsieur, you trembled yesterday with the fear of discovery, but last night when the Major fell, you were watched, guarded, and could not have moved. For you, the danger is real, but you are not the hand that struck. Vale let out a ragged breath of relief, though his eyes remained anxious. Poirot's gaze shifted to Allegra Vezzi. Madame, you brought the mirror to this house. You profited from its sale, yet you would not destroy it. To you, its value was reputation, prestige. To destroy what you had sold as genuine would be to confess fraud. Non, you are clever, but not a fool. Allegra inclined her head, her eyes flashing with wounded pride. Poirot's eyes moved to Celia Ashcroft. Mademoiselle, you are young, desperate for freedom. You resented your uncle, but resentment is not enough to give one the artistry of these crimes. You are too direct. You would strike with words or flight, not with mirrors and stagecraft. Celia's eyes filled with tears, and she pressed her lips together to keep from speaking. At last, Poirot's gaze rested upon Lord Julian. And you, my lord? You are careless, foolish, extravagant. You stain your cuff, you lie with ease, you sneer at danger. You might kill in a duel, in a drunken quarrel, in a reckless brawl. But you would not plan this theatre. Number, you are an actor, yes, but not the playwright. Julian flushed. Then who? Poirot spread his hands, eyes twinkling. Ah, that is the question. But the playwright. I begin to see their style, and soon I shall know their name. After the assembly dispersed, Poirot asked to see Lady Ravenscroft privately. She received him in the morning room, her poise immaculate despite her weariness. You have something to ask me, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot inclined his head. Madame, forgive my bluntness. Twice now, as your son has spoken rashly, I've seen your eyes flash warning toward him. You fear what he may say. Why? Lady Ravenscroft's lips tightened. For a moment she said nothing. Then quietly she replied, Julian is impulsive. He speaks without thought, I would protect him from the consequences of that. Poirot's gaze was steady. Or perhaps you protect him from truth, madame. Perhaps he knows more than he ought. She met his eyes with sudden fierceness. If you believe my son a murderer, you are wrong. He is foolish, yes, but he is no killer. He has his weaknesses, but he has not that in him. Poirot bowed slightly. Perhaps. Yet protection can become a prison, madame. Remember that. By late afternoon, Poirot had secluded himself in the library once more, arranging notes, tracing lines across paper. Japp entered, restless. Well, any progress? Poirot tapped his temple. The little grey cells, they whisper. There is one clue, very small, very delicate, which reveals all. The velvet cord caught on the first mirror, the crescent mark upon the floor, the gold leaf in the dead man's hand, the bitter herbs. Each piece alone, it means nothing. Together, they form the reflection. Japp groaned. Another riddle. Out with it, Poirot. Poirot smiled faintly. Not yet, mon ami. To reveal too soon is to spoil the play before its climax. I must test them once more, and the murderer will betray themselves. But I know now what I needed to know. I know who moved the mirror. I know who planned the theater of death. Japp slammed his fist on the desk. Then tell me. Poirot shook his head gently. Patience, Inspector. The truth must be revealed at the right moment. Otherwise it is wasted. Tonight I shall call them all together, and then we shall see who dares to look into the last mirror. Evening descended again. Poirot, composed and watchful, strolled the corridor where both mirrors had fallen. He paused, fingers brushing the pale crescent mark on the floor where the great gilded mirror had once stood. His eyes softened. Yes, he whispered. This is the key. The mirror was moved, and only one person could have arranged it, without arousing suspicion, without explanation. One person for whom the servants would labor, unquestioning. One person who ruled this house as Reginald ruled his niece. Authority, always authority, and yet motive as well. Motive strong enough to kill twice. He straightened, his expression grave. The hidden clue had spoken. The rest was theater now, the final act of the play. When he returned to the drawing room, Japp confronted him again. Well? Poirot's eyes twinkled, though his voice was soft. I have it, mon ami. The clue overlooked, the key to the whole. It is not the shard, not the stain, not the quarrels. It is the simple matter of who could command the movement of the mirror without question. That is all. The rest follows. Japp stared. You mean... Poirot raised a hand. Hush. Not yet. Tonight, when I gather them all, you will hear it. For now, let us wait. The play must end with a flourish, non? And so the day waned into shadow, the household restless, fearful, waiting. Poirot, calm and implacable, prepared for the final confrontation. He had seen the truth reflected in fragments, pieced it together with patience and psychology. And now he held it close, concealed, waiting for the perfect moment. The murderer thinks they are clever, he murmured, alone in the library. But mirrors, they never lie, and I, Hercule Poirot, have seen what they reflect. The great drawing room of the Ravenscroft townhouse was transformed that evening into a theatre of justice. Heavy curtains muffled the city's twilight, lamps glowed in solemn pools of light, and the sombre faces of the assembled suspects gazed toward Hercule Poirot, as if awaiting a verdict already, etched into the air. Inspector Japp stood near the mantel, his posture stiff, his notes clutched in one hand. Lady Ravenscroft sat straight-backed on a high chair, her face composed yet pale. Beside her lounged Julian, trying for nonchalance but failing. His cigarette hand trembled ever so slightly. Simon Vale shifted uneasily, mopping his forehead. Allegra Vesey held her reticule with white knuckles, her dark eyes glittering. Celia Ashcroft sat near the fire, her hands clasped tightly, her lips pressed together in anxious silence, and at the far end the servants hovered, uncertain, fearful. Poirot, immaculate in his grey suit, stood at the centre. His small frame commanded the room with quiet force. He twirled the tips of his moustache, then spoke, his voice soft but carrying. Mesdames et messieurs, twice within these walls death has struck. Sir Reginald Ashcroft first, and then Major Burroughs. Both deaths, you will recall, were achieved with mirrors, both deaths deliberate, both theatrical, and the murderer sits amongst us still. A collective stir ran through the room. Poirot raised a hand. Patience. You shall know all, but first we must consider the facts as they appeared, and how they were meant to deceive. He began to pace slowly, each step measured. First, Sir Reginald. He was found beneath the great gilded mirror, shattered. At first glance, an accident, yet the fastening had been cut. His hand clutched a fragment of gold leaf, and already suspicion fell upon Mr. Vale, who quarrelled with him over business. Poirot glanced toward Vale, who swallowed hard. But that, mes amis, was a trick. Vale was meant to appear guilty. He was the false lead, chosen because his quarrel was known, his anxiety plain. The true hand of murder concealed itself behind his shadow. Poirot turned, his gaze sweeping the assembly. Then the second death. Major Burroughs, he who boasted of winnings at cards, who perhaps knew more than he should. Again a mirror fell, again a shard pierced with precision, and again the bitter herbs were present, the faint scent of something resinous, medicinal. He paused, tapping his temple. Why herbs, you ask? Because the murderer handled them, perhaps to steady the nerves, perhaps as part of a ruse. They betrayed themselves by touch, by trace. Twice I smelt it, first in the boudoir, then upon the console. His gaze rested briefly on Allegra Vesey. Madame, you sold the mirror, yes. You might have feared exposure, fraud, scandal, but destruction of the very piece you prized? No, it is not your hand. Allegra exhaled, relief softening her poise. Poirot's eyes moved to Vale. Monsieur, you quarrelled, you sweated, you feared. But you are a businessman, not a dramatist. You do not stage death in symbols. No, your guilt is financial, not mortal. Vale sagged, his relief plain. Poirot's gaze settled on Celia. Mademoiselle, you resented your uncle's tyranny. Yes, but you are direct. Your rebellion would have been flight, perhaps even scandal. But not this theatre. Your tears are real, your innocence clumsy. You are not the one. Celia's eyes filled, and she bowed her head. And Lord Julian. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Ah, Julian. The stained cuff, the mockery, the debts. A careless young man, oui. But a schemer. Number. You are a poor liar, but not a patient one. Murder of this kind requires patience, precision. These are qualities you do not possess. Julian flushed, half angry, half relieved. At last, Poirot's gaze came to rest on Lady Ravenscroft. She alone remained composed, her eyes steady, her chin lifted. Madame, Poirot said softly, you sit at the heart of this drama. The mirror was moved before it fell. Only one person could command such a task without question, yourself. The servants obeyed, believing it decoration, instruction. The pale crescent mark on the floor told me so. The mirror had stood elsewhere, then was shifted. Who could order this but the mistress of the house? A murmur ran through the room. Poirot continued, his voice gathering force. You had reason. Sir Reginald, for all his respectability, held power over you. Financial, perhaps even personal. He pressed his interest upon your son, upon your household. You saw the danger. Major Burroughs, too, knew too much, perhaps guessed the truth, and so you struck. Twice Lady Ravenscroft's lips parted, but Poirot lifted a hand. Do not speak yet, madame. Let me complete the picture. Sir Reginald was lured to the hall. The fastening of the mirror was cut beforehand. When he approached, the mirror was released. He grasped at the frame, hence the gold leaf in his hand, and was crushed beneath it. Major Burroughs. Ah, he was less subtle. He must have overheard too much, spoken too freely. The second mirror was prepared in like fashion. He was silenced before he could reveal what he knew. Poirot leaned closer, his voice lowering to a near whisper. The bitter herbs, madame, your physician's draughts, perhaps, to steady your nerves. Twice I smelt them, twice they betrayed you. And the eyes with which you warned your son, when his rash tongue ran too freely. The eyes of a mother who protects, who hides. But not only a mother, also a murderess. The room gasped. Julian sprang to his feet. That's absurd. My mother. Lady Ravenscroft raised a hand, silencing him. Her face was pale, but her voice, when it came, was calm. And what, Monsieur Poirot, do you suppose was my motive? Poirot's eyes softened, though his voice remained firm. Madame, I think you sought to preserve what you valued most, your son, your family's name. Sir Reginald held secrets, perhaps debts, perhaps scandal. He sought control, influence, power. He threatened Julian, perhaps with ruin, perhaps worse. And Major Burroughs, he guessed the truth and would have spoken. You killed to protect, madame. But protection purchased with blood is destruction. For a moment, silence. Lady Ravenscroft sat still, her hands folded in her lap. Then she spoke, low and clear. You are clever, Monsieur Poirot. Clever enough to see what others missed. Yes, I moved the mirror. Yes, I commanded the servants. They thought it merely rearrangement for the ball. I cut the fastening myself when no one watched. And when Reginald came, he deserved his fate. He had ruined men, broken women, plotted to entrap my son in scandal. He would have destroyed us, so I destroyed him. A collective murmur swept the room. Julian clutched his mother's arm, white-faced. Mother, she shook her head. Be still, Julian. I do not regret it. Her eyes turned cold. But Burroughs, that was not my doing. I swear it. He drank, he boasted, he staggered. I did not kill him. Poirot's brows rose. Ah, that, madame, is most curious. Japp stepped forward, hard-eyed. You've confessed to one murder, Lady Ravenscroft. That's enough to hang you. Poirot raised a hand. Patience, mon ami. She has confessed, yes, but she denies the second death, and she may speak truth. For the hand that killed Burroughs, that may be another. The room erupted in confusion. Allegra cried out. Vale muttered. Celia gasped. Julian's face went chalk white. Poirot raised his voice, cutting through the tumult. There are two crimes, mes amis, but perhaps not one hand. Lady Ravenscroft struck down Sir Reginald. But Major Burroughs, for him, I suspect another culprit altogether. And tomorrow, when we gather again, I shall prove it. He bowed his head, mustaches gleaming. For now, let us rest. The play is not yet ended. The silence that followed Poirot's pronouncement was thick and stifling, like a curtain that had suddenly descended mid-performance. Every face in the drawing-room was frozen, caught between shock and disbelief. The lamps hissed faintly, and outside in the square a carriage rattled past, the ordinary world oblivious to the drama unfolding within. Lady Ravenscroft sat motionless, her hands folded in her lap, her head bowed but her back rigid. She had confessed, and yet her composure was intact, almost defiant. Julian hovered beside her, pale and restless, his cigarette forgotten, his lips trembling with unspoken words. Simon Vale stared with bulging eyes, as though unable to comprehend that suspicion had shifted away from him. Allegra Vesey clutched her reticule as though it contained her very soul, and Celia Ashcroft seemed on the verge of collapse, her eyes darting from one to another in terrified fascination. Jap broke the stillness with a bark. "Well, that's that. She's admitted to Ashcroft's death. Murder, plain and simple. The second. Non, mon ami." Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm yet firm. "It is not so simple. Lady Ravenscroft has spoken truth, yes, truth of one crime. But of the second, she denies, and her denial has the ring of sincerity. For Major Burroughs, the hand was different." The inspector frowned. "Two murderers in one house? It beggars belief." Poirot's mustaches twitched. "Belief, my friend, is the servant of truth, not its master. It is rare, yes, but not impossible. One crime may provoke another, as the stone cast into a pond creates ripples far wider than the first splash." He turned, his gaze sweeping the room. "Tonight we shall end this. Tonight I shall show you who silenced Major Burroughs, and why." Poirot began pacing slowly before the assembled company, his small hands clasped behind his back. His voice, though soft, carried with inexorable clarity. "Let us consider the Major. He was a man of bluster, of vanity. He played cards loudly, boasted of winnings, spoke without caution. Yet such men, though foolish, sometimes stumble upon truth. He saw something. He knew something. He became dangerous." Poirot stopped, his eyes narrowing. Now, who feared him? Lady Ravenscroft. None. Her crime was already committed. She had no reason to silence the Major, for he could not prove what she had done. He suspected, perhaps, but suspicion alone is not proof. She would not risk again what she had already risked once his gaze shifted. Simon Vale. Again, no. He was too relieved by the shifting suspicion away from himself to take further action. And he was guarded. He could not have left his chamber unnoticed. He moved nearer Allegra Vesey, who stiffened. "Madame, what of you?" "You feared scandal, yes, if your mirror were revealed as false. Yet Burroughs did not know of that. He had no interest in art, only in cards and gossip. No, you are clear of his death." Allegra exhaled shakily, though her eyes flickered with resentment at being so publicly dissected. Poirot's gaze turned now to Celia. "Mademoiselle, you are honest in your hatred of your uncle's control. But hatred alone does not make cunning. You are too transparent. You could not have staged such a silencing." At last, Poirot's eyes rested upon Julian Ravenscroft. The young man shifted uneasily, his hand twitching toward his pocket for another cigarette. Poirot's voice deepened. "And so we come to you, Lord Julian. You, who had the motive to protect your mother, who had debts that Sir Reginald threatened to expose. You who feared Major Burroughs, for he was indiscreet and had overheard more than he ought. He might have spoken of your quarrel with Sir Reginald, your rash words in the gallery. He might have ruined you. And so you silenced him." Julian's face blanched. "That's absurd." How could I?" Poirot raised a finger. "Because, my lord, you were the only one with access. You alone wandered the corridors that night, restless, prowling. Servants saw you. The constable heard your steps. And the shard. Ah, the shard. It was not fallen by chance. It was placed with deliberation into Burroughs's throat, and on it the faint smear of bitter herbs. Not Lady Ravenscroft's tinctures, but yours." Julian's mouth opened in protest, but Poirot pressed on, relentless. "You use them, do you not? To soothe your nerves, to still your hands when the debts mount and the creditors press. The stain was on your cuff the night of Sir Reginald's death. It betrayed you again with Burroughs. You, Lord Julian, are the second murderer." The room erupted in gasps. Celia cried out. Vale muttered, "I knew it." Allegra clutched her reticule tighter. Lady Ravenscroft's hand shot to her throat, and for the first time her composure cracked. Julian staggered to his feet. No, it was not like that. I didn't mean—" He stopped, staring at Poirot, caught like a moth in a flame. Poirot's eyes softened, but his voice was steady. "You did not plan as your mother planned. You struck in panic, in desperation. You saw Burroughs stumble from the card room boasting, perhaps drunk. You remembered his words, his hints, his jibes. You thought he would betray you. You waited by the mirror, already loosened perhaps by another hand, and when he came, you pushed. The shard finished what your fear began." Julian sank back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. "He would have ruined me." He laughed at me. He said he knew Mother. He broke off, choking on the words. Lady Ravenscroft rose, her face pale, her eyes blazing. "Enough, Julian." Say no more, but Poirot's gaze held hers, grave and inexorable. "Madame, you see now the truth. You killed to protect your son, and he killed to protect himself, and perhaps you. In striving to shield him, you taught him to strike as you did. It is the tragedy of protection turned to poison." Japp stepped forward, his face grim. "Well, Poirot, you've done it again. 2 killers, mother and son." "God help us," Poirot bowed his head. "Justice, Inspector, is never neat, but it must be whole. Sir Reginald died by the hand of Lady Ravenscroft. Major Burroughs died by the hand of Lord Julian. And so it is." The aftermath was silence, broken only by Celia's quiet sobbing. Allegra looked away, her lips compressed. Vale slumped, as though the weight of suspicion had at last rolled from him. The servant stood in shocked stillness, awaiting orders that none would give. Lady Ravenscroft gathered herself with magnificent dignity. She placed a hand on her son's shoulder, though he shrank beneath it. "Then it ends here." "Inspector, do what you must. I will go quietly," Julian whispered hoarsely. "Mother, I never meant—" She silenced him with a glance. "No, Julian. Do not speak. Words have betrayed us enough." Poirot bowed deeply. "Madame, you have courage. That I grant you. But courage cannot cleanse what has been done." Later, when the suspects had been taken away under guard and the household was hushed once more, Japp poured himself a stiff drink in the library and gestured for Poirot to join him. "2 culprits in one case," Japp muttered. "It'll make the headlines for weeks. You were right about everything, Poirot, though I'd never have guessed it myself. But tell me, what was the clue that gave it away?" Poirot smiled faintly, touching the curve of his mustache. "Ah, mon ami, it was always the mirror. Not the glass, but what it reflected. The pale crescent mark on the floor, it told me the mirror had been moved. Only Lady Ravenscroft could order that. The herbs on the shard, they told me who had handled it. Julian, the rest was psychology. Always psychology." He sipped his cordial delicately. "You see, my friend, murder is rarely about opportunity alone. It is about character. Lady Ravenscroft, with her iron will, killed with planning and authority. Julian, with his weakness and fear, killed with impulse. The reflection of their souls was in the mirrors they chose. And I," he tapped his temple, "I merely observed." Japp shook his head. "You make it sound easy. But God knows, no one else could have seen it." Poirot's eyes softened. "Non, mon ami. Not easy. But simple. Once the mind is orderly, the truth is always simple." He rose, straightening his cuffs. "Come. The case is ended. The glass is shattered, but the reflection remains, and it tells us, as always, of human folly." The following morning, dawned with a heavy mist, as though the city itself sought to veil the scandal that had unfolded in the Ravenscroft house. Constables moved quietly through the corridors, packing away evidence and seeing to the final arrangements. The broken mirrors had been removed, yet their absence left the walls looking oddly bare, like a stage stripped after a play. In the library, Poirot and Japp sat together once more. Lady Ravenscroft and her son had been taken into custody before dawn. Their departure had been conducted with dignity, though whispers among the servants would surely ripple through Mayfair by midday. Japp rubbed his temples and muttered, "Never thought I'd see the day. A mother and son, each guilty in their way. It'll shock society to its core. The papers will have a field day." Poirot adjusted his cuffs with his usual precision. "Society, my friend, always delights in scandal, especially when it comes dressed in silk and jewels. But behind every scandal, there is a truth. That is all I care for. The truth," Japp gave a grunt. "Still, hang the truth. If you ask me, it's tragedy. She killed to protect her boy, and the boy killed out of fear." "Can't say as I like it." Poirot's eyes softened, though his tone was grave. "Non, mon ami. It is not for us to like or dislike. Lady Ravenscroft made her choice when she moved the mirror. Julian made his when he silenced the Major. Each believed they were saving what they loved, yet in truth they destroyed it. Such is the irony of crime. It feeds on fear, and it devours even those it was meant to shield." He rose and began to pace, his small hands clasped neatly behind his back. "Do you not see, Japp?" The mirror, it was the perfect symbol. Lady Ravenscroft sought to shatter the reflection of Sir Reginald's power. Julian, poor boy, sought to shatter the reflection of Burroughs's gossip. But mirrors, they reflect the soul, and when they break, they reveal only fragments. That is what we saw. Fragments of fear, fragments of pride, fragments of love corrupted into violence. Japp drained his glass. "You and your philosophy, Poirot. You're right, of course, but I'll be glad when this case is put to bed. Too many bodies, too much theatre for my liking." Poirot smiled faintly. "And yet, mon ami, you must admit, it was a drama, most fitting. One could almost call it a tragedy in 2 acts. By midday, the house began to empty. Guests who had been detained departed quickly, leaving behind polite notes of sympathy and relief. Allegra Vesey slipped away in her black motor car, her reputation bruised, but her freedom intact. Simon Vale left with a weight off his shoulders, though it was clear his business would suffer in the weeks to come. Celia Ashcroft departed quietly with the family solicitor, her youth suddenly aged by what she had witnessed. Poirot stood in the doorway, watching them go, his expression unreadable. Lady Ravenscroft had walked out of the house with her head high, her son clinging to her arm. Neither had spoken, yet Poirot, watching from the shadows of the hall, had seen in her eyes both defiance and despair. She had acted with resolve, but she knew the cost. Julian, pale and trembling, seemed a ghost already, crushed beneath the weight of his actions. They were 2 people bound not only by blood, but now also by guilt. That evening, Poirot and Japp shared a final conversation before leaving the townhouse behind. The fire burned low in the grate, and the hush of the room felt almost like a requiem. "So that's it, then," Japp said. "The law will take its course. 2 trials, 2 convictions, most likely." "What a mess!" Poirot nodded. "Justice, mon ami, is not always tidy, but it must be done." He tapped his temple. "Still, it teaches us something. Do you recall what I told you on the first night? That we must not be clumsy in our thinking. It was true here. Everyone looked to Vale because his quarrel was loud, but the true murderer, she was silent, composed, and silence can be more dangerous than anger." Japp gave a weary laugh. "I'll remember that, Poirot. though I hope the next case is a simple stabbing in an alley. No mirrors, no theatre, no riddles, Poirot chuckled softly. Ah, but then you would miss me, mon cher, for what is life without a little drama? Later, as Poirot prepared to leave, he paused in the grand hall. The walls were bare now, the broken mirrors gone. He stood for a moment, gazing at the pale crescent mark still faintly visible on the floor where the great gilded mirror had once stood. His eyes grew reflective. Mirrors, he murmured. They are like truth. They show us what we wish to see and what we fear to see. But when they are broken, the fragments, they cut. Always they cut. He adjusted his hat, turned to the waiting cab, and stepped into the misty London evening. Behind him, the Ravenscroft house loomed in silence, its grandeur dulled, its mirrors gone, its secrets laid bare. And Poirot, immaculate and serene, departed with the composure of a man who had once more brought order out of chaos. In the end, Lady Ravenscroft and her son would stand trial, their names forever bound to scandal. The other guests returned to their lives, chastened but relieved, and Poirot, as always, moved on, his little grey cells already turning toward the next enigma. For him, the case of the gilded mirror was not only about murder, but about human nature, the lies we tell to protect those we love, the deceptions we weave around ourselves, and the way fear can shatter even the most polished surface. As his cab rolled away, Poirot allowed himself a small, wry smile. The mirrors, they're gone, he murmured. But the reflections, they remain. And always they tell the truth. And with that, Hercule Poirot vanished into the London mist, leaving behind another mystery solved, another fragment of order restored, and the faintest echo of his wit and wisdom lingering like the afterglow of a candle in a darkened room.